Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Machona from Ultrasound Ventures. It's 11:25, and we will be beginning with our moderation panel. Here today, I have um, Oscar, Vashali, and Naoki. I hope I'm not butchering these names, but I will let you guys introduce yourself. You want to go first, Vashali?
Why me? Okay, lovely to meet everyone. I am Vashali. I'm based here in London. I wear three hats, of which one is as a venture capitalist, as part of a VC firm. We have four funds. One is stationed here, and three others are across UK, Europe, India, and South Korea. My second hat looks at operation. So this is essentially around being an operator where you, as a founder, I've also been part of that journey, if you will. And building a startup is very difficult. So having that hat is really, really important. And then the final hat looks at innovation. So when you have due diligence, obviously it's done financially, but there is a key aspect which looks at technical due diligence. So what we look at is beyond the venture studio, accelerator, and incubator. We've built a model which looks at technical due diligence and a test bed for startups. And this is in the deep tech, fintech, and healthcare expertise side of things. Thanks.
Nice, thank you.
I'll go next. So hi, nice to meet you all. So my name is Naoki, and I'm partner at Global Brain. So we are one of the largest Japanese VC funds and invest in startups globally and headquartered in Tokyo, but also have offices in Seoul, Korea, Singapore, Jakarta, Indonesia, Shanghai, Bangalore, San Francisco, and London. And about 7 years ago, so I came here to set up our operations here. And since then, I'm based in London, and I have been heading up our activities here. And we are kind of unique in a way as a VC because we manage not only our pure VC fund, but also our corporate venture capital funds. So that's why we are hybrid. So we manage 22 different funds and one mothership and 21 corporate venture capital funds. So that's why we can be a pure investor or maybe strategic investor to Asia. That's how we are positioned. Nice to meet you.
My name's Oscar, and I'm a partner in Orbi, which is a global South venture capital fund based in Asia, in Africa, and Latin America. Is this working? No? We actually don't need it now. Do you need it?
I think it's working.
Can you hear me well? Okay, then let's use it this way. It's more comfortable for everybody. So we are, as I mentioned, global South venture capital fund investing in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We focus on technology companies that are modernizing and upgrading traditional industries with the goal of raising living standards. We deployed in over 300 portfolio companies, and we have like this mix of very high, one of the top 5 performing VC funds in our vintage for funds with enough track record. But at the same time, we have a huge goal of looking at emerging markets as a huge opportunity. It's not markets that have massive populations that are in need. They are massive populations with underserved customers that just need products and services that need to be built differently, need to be distributed differently, and need also to be monetized differently. So we've created a lot of this expertise, and as part of our team, we have 40 people full-time working in the company, with 30 of them working in a value creation team. That value creation allows us to increase significantly the rate of success of our companies. Our 2015 fund, we still have over 50% of the companies that we invested, which is over 100 companies in that fund, still operational, and potentially with some of them they already give us a return, some of them on track to give us actually a positive return for the fund, which changes a lot the typical structure of VC funds, where you have one or two super winners that will be the only ones that will return. We also have this type of outside returns because we don't look for unicorns, but eventually, if you do a good job and you invest in enough companies, eventually you find those unicorns. No? So we have a couple of unicorns in our first fund, and then we have a couple more in the second fund. Hopefully, more will come. So looking forward to engage in conversations with a smaller crowd in this session now. So happy to have conversations now or later.
Nice, nice. Let's start off at the top. So, first question is, how are Asian startups adjusting their strategies to the globally changing economic landscape? Who wants to go first?
Yeah, mainly I can talk about Japanese and Korean startups. I think these guys, the strategy have not been shifted so much yet, probably. So actually, Japan and Korea, of course, now we are kind of strengthening the tie in terms of kind of startup ecosystem. And many people are flying into Seoul, and many people from Seoul are flying into Tokyo and exchange some deals and so on now. So then definitely our two countries tie are kind of increasing. And also, of course, we are more kind of connected with US. So then, of course, current tariff could affect, but at this moment, we are not seeing so much yet.
I'm going to add to that. I think it's about being conservative, but also ahead of the game. So, those startups or those businesses that are looking at what's happening in the geopolitical situation, they want to be nimble ahead of the game. So, they're looking at different supply chains, not just local ones, but other countries, if you will. So, the way we look at things is Simsan has this unique way of doing cross-border technology innovation. So for that, you've got different parts of the world. So you've got UK and Europe, and you have India, and you have South Korea. So with those jurisdictions, if you're building borders, if you're talking to different suppliers, manufacturers, or whatever we're talking about, it could be hardware, it could be software, then you end up building a new supply chain which kind of mitigates against that geopolitical issue.
A follow on for Oscar, because Oscar, you're, I believe, emerging markets. So, and you have a few investments in Latam. So, how do you see this differs across regions like Latam versus Southeast Asia?
I mean, I think for me, Asia. I've been living in Asia for almost 20 years, and that's where we have 70% of our portfolio. And I think first thing is that Asia is just too big to talk about Asia. So, like the differences that you have are absolutely incredible. But I think there are a few patterns that make Asia as a region very interesting, especially in comparison with other regions. So, I think one of the key things is in Asia you have like a focus on education from the families that is incredible. One of the reasons why you have these pools of talent in most parts of Asia is because of that type of education background with huge talent. There's a lot of survival in many aspects. Like life in many parts of Asia is challenging. It's difficult. Like the weather doesn't make things easy. Sometimes the geography also makes things complicated. So I think there is a very rooted approach of like we need to work hard just to survive, whereas in many other parts of the world, like it's easier, no? And that comes from generations. And I think that foundation is very important. There's also more, at least from my experience. No? I'm originally in Spanish. When I go to Latin America, I do see the local culture, but there's a lot of assimilation of culture. Whereas in the case of Asia, I think there's a lot of very different cultures. The amount of alphabets that you have in Asia, you don't have that difference of alphabets. The religions are way more different. Or maybe in Africa you also have, but I see more diversity and more difference, no, between what you will see in East Asia, in Southeast Asia, in South Asia. Huge difference. And I think that there is that creates big difference on how things are built. No? At the same time, I think every area of the world has their own competitive advantage. So you have, I think, more social development in most parts of Latin America, but the adoption of technology is way less that you have in parts of Asia or even in Africa. No? When people talk about Kenya adoption of mobile payments, that blows at everybody's mind. Like they said, no, I'm talking about I'm talking about that. Like just open your mind about the fact that things are so different.
Amazing, amazing. And speaking of diversity, Asia is super diverse, and 2/3 of the population live there. And we've seen a lot of technology come out to there. So we're going to switch gears over to AI. And Vasilia, was I'm keen to hear how you think deep tech is scaling across border, and especially with AI taking center stage in India and China. What are some of the key lessons that startups could learn or investors could learn moving forward?
So I'm not going to speak on China because we don't look at China. Um, what I can do is add the perspective of those who are building here but have the immigrant view and they're working with their home countries. So there's one particular example I can give you. The best way I could describe it is through a case, right? So what we're working on at this point in time is a use case for healthcare and AI. I think the concept of artificial intelligence is being used in a way that should not be done. It should be a little more detailed. You've got to be a bit more technical, not use jargon. So this particular startup looks at infrastructure. If anyone here understands derivatives, What you have is a financial strategy which has an underlying asset. So what this particular startup is doing, you're welcome to look it up. They're called Bioma and Titan Diagnostics. So you've got here a physical infrastructure which underpins artificial intelligence as a digital infrastructure. So to answer your question, I think the way artificial intelligence should be used is as a tool to support, not as sort of the flag to gain the smart capital or the funds. So again, to describe Titan Diagnostics, they have laboratories. So we're looking at chronic disease management, which solves for a big problem across the planet. So you have hospitals that are overpopulated, less staff, there's not much treatment. So in this case, chronic disease management is sort of taking up that space. Taking that out and putting it into the private sector is interesting. So these laboratories look at that, everything from vitamin screening to cancer and everything in between. And building that physical infrastructure, you'd think it's high capex. They've been very, very nimble about it. They've been doing things like partnering up with corporates. So to your point, Network Rail is a company that they're working with. So you'll be asking me, why railways and why healthcare and why AI, right? So railways are seen as a very traditional and sort of old sector. Using that, it's the real estate piece we're looking at here. So 2,100 stations is the access to open laboratories to provide these services to everybody. But it looks at the B2C element. So the software piece or the digital component looks at AI. So using AI and machine learning, trying to get the inferences and the insights from patient data. Because everything is now about data. But our data is disorganized. To organize it needs to be done carefully within the healthcare sector. So it's done through the physical infrastructure. And then the digital piece builds a component which puts the control back into the clinician's hands. So here, you're not looking at a device that you're wearing and you're trying to figure out, okay, I've taken a blood test. I'm low in these biomarkers. What does that mean? It's the doctor looking at that or the physician saying, actually, this is what's wrong. This speeds up the appointment time. It gets the information instead of saying, okay, here's some drugs, take them, see what happens, right? So that's a use case there, a real life use case. And I think using AI in the sort of non-physical component kind of takes away the power. So that's just one example. Happy to share more if anyone wants to chat about deep tech and then bring that into real life use cases.
Right, right. And moving, we've seen a trend that a lot of governments in Asia are investing in, chips, space, biotech. What kind of opportunities are there, and how should founders position yourself? Naoki, you want to take this one?
Yeah, actually, of course, given the current geopolitical situation, I think in terms of kind of manufacturing semiconductors and so on, now Japan is getting huge attention from all over the world. And also, actually, next month, I'm organizing a semiconductor-related events together with the British government and the Japanese government here during London Tech Week. So definitely, UK and Europe, Japan want to kind of strengthen the tie, especially for semiconductors. And also recently, of course, Holland is also saying they want to partner with Japan and so on. That's why now is a huge opportunity for us, of course. So then try to compete with other countries and so on. So yeah.
I'm
And
just going to add to that, if that's okay.
yeah, of course.
So we look at AI. How is that funded? How does that work? You've got things like semiconductors and all these different components. They're necessary in order to make the AI and the ML work. And the idea that Japan is becoming a superpower, we also don't forget South Korea, right?
Yeah.
To compete with China and everybody else, it's quite an interesting conversation where you're able to, again, dissipate through different supply chains, right? And then the infrastructure and the technology that comes from it. I'm just going to add here the government piece. So just to speak on South Korea, they're very much invested from the government side in startups and the startup ecosystem. They're funding them. They're providing the funding to be able to get the IP, get test beds, go through accelerators. And that in itself supercharges the area to be able to dissipate the supply chains.
Nice, nice. Just to chip in a little bit when it comes to semiconductors, it's a huge space. Last year, it grew 24%, $800 million market. And I guess my question is, how do you assess these verticals? There's a lot of startups that are going to be coming up claiming that they're semiconductor companies.
Yeah, actually, if you look at those semiconductor-related companies, I think so now the hype is mainly on the quantum side, probably. So in UK, Europe, and the US, so those quantum startups are kind of categorized as a semiconductor, but actually not. But and also there are some other kind of semiconductor startups trying to utilize new materials and so on, cheaper and more kind of electricity efficient and so on. So these are the two kind of main pillars I'm seeing. So that's why definitely, I say, once they prove this works, then of course could be a big opportunity. But quantum science takes time, so that's why that's more like a government-related play, right? So which country is going to win in the next generation of supercomputers or something like that? So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. The next question is for Oscar. So, what kind of cross-border collaborations are you seeing and the powerful tools that could be used to mitigate risks?
I think cross-border collaboration right now, and kind of like tying with these topics that we're discussing about AI, is actually fundamental and necessary. You know, when people talk about AI, I think today too many people think about the core AI. No, they talk about the models. Now we're building new models. And I think this is a very narrow view of the whole opportunity and
Yeah.
the whole ecosystem. So on one side you have the tools that are necessary for AI, no? From databases, the annotation, cybersecurity right now for me is something super interesting because I mean the moment everything is in AI, that becomes very very critical. So I think that creates a lot of opportunities. I don't think anyone can create everything. No? Even like people might think, oh, China can do that. That's not correct. No? And talking about semiconductors right now, for example, the amount of investment going to places like Vietnam and Malaysia as semiconductor hubs are quite important. But what for me is the most interesting is at the end of the day, I think many of these, as an investor, okay, I mean, we maybe have a very particular type of bias and where we see the opportunity. Um, I think that play of the hard tech, which I find very appealing, very interesting because of my tech background. But as an investor, for me, sometimes it's a very difficult game to play. And it's a game for like really large investments, a lot of government investment, a lot of very strategic investment. So that for me, the game that is more interesting to play is a game on the application of all of that. No? And that becomes mostly about the capacity to take data and use that data to be able to solve a real problem that might be super simple in many cases. No? For us, the key is AI in emerging markets is the only way to be able to raise living standards in a both economically and environmental manner. No? And very simple example is a company that became the originally Vietnamese company that called Elsa that what they help people was with accent reduction. You can work really hard on studying, but at the end of the day, accent becomes a big issue, no? And particularly in Vietnam. If you're able to speak an English that people can understand, so you can do calls, so you can participate, your salary can go 2 to 3x the regular salary. That's a big difference where people is willing to pay. You don't need to subsidize that. I mean, they're willing to pay because they know that after a few months, their English accent would get better, and then they will be able to improve their salary. That company today is a global company. That was the first AI company that Google backed in Asia.
I'm so sorry to interrupt here, but I was going to say, how sad is that we have to have companies to change accents? You know, it's
I think it's sad.
We have a new model that helps you change your accents.
yeah, but
I think it's sad. I think it's a. I mean, I work with people from all over the world, and I see the challenge. It's not about changing the accent because they will not change your accent. I mean, I'm Spanish. I think everybody can hear where my accent comes from. But in general, I'm understandable. Okay, I have a situation where I mean, I work with founders from many parts of the world that their accent sometimes. So the case, for example, of South Asia, people speak really good English, too good. To be honest,
I agree.
too good, but the accent is very difficult for many people. So we had situations where we had some people that required someone else from South Asia to translate what they were saying in English, and then there were like people from other markets that they even couldn't understand, and that was already quite understandable. So I don't think it's sad. I think actually it's very good that they're making that affordable, so everybody can communicate, and it's communication. You maintain your identity, but you are going to be able to communicate. But the same case happened for health. No, like we have a company right now deploying very actively in India through digital therapeutics, and that's the way they're scaling access to psychiatry services and able to improve significantly the lives of people, as mental health being a huge issue, very difficult to tackle. And without AI, that solution at scale will not be deployed. No? And there's countless cases, no? Reduction of post-harvesting waste. Like we have like companies that they do all the work, the farmers do all the hard work, and post-harvesting you have like 50% waste. That's why that's a pain. So you can leverage AI and reduce that waste to 5%. So these huge, very positive applications.
Amazing, amazing. Switching gears to ESG and sustainability. How are ESG and sustainability shaping investor appetite and founder roadmaps in Asia? Anyone want to go for this?
I can start, and I've got more to add, but how does one define ESG? Right, it's one of those terms which is again seen as uh, a jargon or something to maybe add to a startup or a business or a company or a corporate governance arm to be able to get access to something. So I think it's about looking, let's go backwards. And there's something that I'm working on at the moment and happy to share with anybody. How do we define it on the basis of real life problems? So the SDGs, so the UN decided to put together 17 of them. We need to go back to that. Have a look at why we're doing this. And that's where the ESG will be defined in the right way. What I can attest to in terms of where Asia is looking at this is they're people who are building businesses who have real life problems. So a lot of founders that I talk to, the ones who are passionate about the problem that they faced, they're the ones who will build it to the end. That commitment, track record, and the passion towards building, whether they're going through a hard time, is really important. So I think maybe it's the immigrant status, maybe it's the, oh, I want to move to the West, but they're the ones seeing the problems, whether it's climate, whether it's health, all the things that you've been talking about, Oscar. They see that day to day. So they're able to define what ESG really is. And then I guess the S component brings in diversity. Right. So if you're someone and I'm someone who walks into a room where I'm not seen as part of the gang or part of the clique because I look so different or I speak differently, so those different things, they're addressing them. They're finding solutions like that startup you mentioned that raised the funding. Finding those problems and solving them it goes from every sector. So you're looking at climate, you're looking at healthcare, you're looking at deep technologies, you're looking at everything. So it's all encompassing. I think the problem solution statement is across the board. So I think that's where I'll stop to let everybody else contribute and then add more.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And how do you think it's evolving? I'll let the rest.
Yeah, actually, ESG, SDGs, of course, there are lots of discussions around that, but of course, now US is a bit staying away from this one. That's affecting, of course, Japan, South Korea as well, and also maybe here as well. So that's why it's kind of now we are at the time we need to rethink how we are going to, so as you said, so we need to kind of, why we are doing this. We need to figure out this to move to the next level. So otherwise, maybe the discussion could be stalled.
I think that my opinion is that people lost track, and they kind of like that was something to become a guidance and became an objective where it became more important to hit certain, like to do things in a certain way than actually achieving results. And I don't think it needs to be compromised, but at the end of the day, if you're not achieving results, doesn't matter. No, I see that a lot, for example, with our climate activity, where when you look at climate in emerging markets, the situation is very different. So the climate change problem that we are experiencing today, it's not caused by what's happening in emerging markets. Emerging markets are suffering most of the consequences of climate change. And the game of climate in emerging markets is first adaptation. But the truth is that 85% of the people in the world lives in emerging markets. And if that development, and this development is unstoppable, and many people is working on trying to make sure that it's more equitable, eventually the carbon footprint in emerging markets is gonna raise. So we have an opportunity to change the way things are done and do things differently. That a lot of the element of innovation. Huh? When I look at gender, for example, like my team, the team that I work with is 90% women. And it is because we don't have any problem we don't judge people based on their gender, but there's many programs, for example, that they try to push 50% entrepreneurship in portfolios in places where it's just not possible. And what you're doing in some cases is actually you're pushing unprepared people, unready to do something, put them on the spot. In many cases, they fail because they're not ready to do what they are asked to do, and that discourages the next generations because that creates more problems. So I think it's very important. I believe in diversity. I believe in many of these things, but it needs to be rational. It needs to be applied for result. Like climate needs to be valuable, and like gender lenses. All of this needs to be viable. It needs to work.
I'm going to flip that. I'm going to talk India for a little while. So there's something that I've seen, and obviously ecosystems vary in different countries, and certain countries are ahead of others. So, for example, India, e-commerce, general trading, getting access to like normal things is big for them now. And this is aside to looking at all the tech hubs. And one particular startup I've seen, and they're making waves because they hold the Prime Minister's handle. They're called Frontier Markets. Have a look at them. And what they're doing is they're looking at the rural side of India. So access to things there is very different to in the urban setting. So to be able to give access to that is going to be really interesting, whether it's the unbanked for payments, for banking systems, to put all your money into an area where it's safe. But also the area where you mentioned climate, right? They're going to respond to those things very differently. And solving for that is quite interesting too, but they're building a platform for that. And I think doing that for women is quite interesting because then you're bringing the education piece. So they're actually training these individuals. So they might not have access or knowledge to be able to build and exceed and sort of get to the point where you list a company, but they're actually getting to the point where impact really makes a difference and they're able to survive. So you've got the education piece, the training piece, access to new materials and technologies, and then to be able to just survive and thrive.
Amazing. We're gonna wrap this up with some lightning round questions, and then open up to the audience for some questions. So it's just really gonna be one question, really, in 30 seconds per person. What trend in Asia startup ecosystem are you excited about? Go.
I mean, I'm very interested in embedded finance. I think embedded finance is going to change the landscape of innovation, enabling things that can happen without that.
Amazing.
I'm going to say cross-pollination of 3 different sectors. So healthcare, climate, and finance. You bring those 3 together, you're solving for the climate issue, you're providing access to the finance piece, but also those 2 together impacting healthcare. You're creating things like tokens through blockchain. So that's what I'm excited about.
It's really interesting.
Actually, so my point of view is a bit different. Actually, so I'm only speaking for Japanese startup ecosystem. I actually the startup ecosystem is kind of struggling, I think, because almost all startups are still domestic. So their business, maybe over 90% of their business are all done in Japan only. So that's why they are struggling to go global. So then, of course, then many VCs and the governments are trying to push them to go global, but it has not been successful yet. Of course, we need to keep trying. And also, one of the reasons I'm staying here is also, of course, I'd like to bridge these gaps. But hopefully,
help you.
make, yeah, of course, I can make this kind of activities more kind of trendy and so on.
Amazing, amazing. Now opening up to the audience. Does anyone have any questions? Sure.
From the landscape of how all this startups works, is it you're really looking to, I guess, provide operating support that means that a lot of companies can stay alive and then also still return. I'm just wondering they do get some traditional VC model, but like, how does that like change your curve? It's not just 1 or 2 I think it's like a bigger baseline. And yeah, how does that also affect how you broaden investors?
So sometimes we joke that it's a bit like PE for early stage, because the percentage of success is higher, and sometimes the multiples are lower. I mean, the benefit, what makes us thrill, and the reason we were able to become like on the top performing funds is because we have a good return on a consistent performance, and then the winners is what makes us gives us that 8x potential return on the overall fund. So the challenge for this is that you have a lot of companies and you have a lot of portfolio management to work on. But we were very entrepreneurial the way we are, and we turned that potentially could be a challenge into actually an opportunity. So many of the founders that we have in our portfolio, they become an active part of the ecosystem. So we cannot drive this idea of like you get help what you need, but you can help very easily. So all founders, they are the best people. Like any of we have a community that was built in kind of values, etc. Anybody needs help, the best resource is the founder community. The founder community, it's kind of like primary data of everything. We find out about problems before the problems are actually published in many aspects. And what is more interesting, we also find the solution. The founders find the solution. So that's kind of like that is also very different. It's like, oh, but everybody, but you have a large portfolio and that's a lot of work. It's like, well, let's make the opportunity change completely.
Amazing.
About bridging global gaps. At what point does a company in, let's say, the Asian ecosystem need to expand internationally their business / seek investment globally, or can they thrive just from staying in the ecosystem?
Who's the question to?
I can share cases, but
Hey, we have one question at the back. Is it okay if we combine them? Can you remember it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic insights. Thank you so much. My question really is about the discussions we've had. We talked about quantum computing, we talked about LLMs. So they also leave a large amount of carbon footprint. I want to understand how much of these ESG metrics do you incorporate in your due diligence process? I know we see some more focused on growth potential rather than ESGs. It's the job of the impact funds. But has the idea grown on you? Do you actively incorporate ESG metrics, especially carbon footprint impact?
All right. Thank you so much. So I repeat the two questions. The first question from this gentleman in the middle was, at what stage, when you're talking about cross-border collaboration, does a startup start to consider that? Is that correct? And then the final question was, LLMs and technology do take up a considerable amount of environmental impact. And so your question is to the fund managers here, like, what strategies are they using to kind of evaluate and assess the startups that they go through their due diligence process? Is that correct? Cool. Who wants to go first?
Cross-border point, of course, I can start. So actually, so it depends on the domains you are working on and also the geolocations where you are based. So Asia, if we are talking about Asia, Asia is not unified, so like EU or something like that. So that's why each country has a different ecosystem and a different culture and a different business kind of norms and so on. That's why it's harder to crack in there. Always, definitely you should grow in the local market first. So same in UK, same in Europe, same in US. Then after that, you need to start thinking to go global. But what does global mean? So maybe just from a UK startup's point of view, maybe going to US or maybe Europe. And in Japan, in China, in maybe Korea, maybe going to Singapore, or maybe going to the countries next to each other or something like that. Then in the case of Asia, you need to go one by one. So that's why it takes time. That's why so maybe easier ways to acquire another company and so on in a different region. So that's how we are expanding. So yeah.
I'll add a bit to that. Let's look at the building blocks of businesses, right? So regardless of jurisdiction, country, culture, whatever, all these different demographics, you need to see whether it's a viable business model, right? So that you check with the team, with the product, the service, whatever you're building, the basic things. And if you're able to solidify that in your local market, you've won the consumer, right? So once you've won your local consumer, you need to figure out, okay, where else is this product or service required? So then you look at different markets. It's not just about looking at trends here. It's about the trends against what you're building. So let's say it's a Korean startup and they want to move to the West. They'll look at where there's a gap. So there's a business that we're working, Enercamp. And these guys are looking at EV charging. So it's easy to incorporate that into the local ecosystem, but when you're looking at the West, it might be a little bit more difficult. So it's about assessing the market. If you're able to look at the area in which your product or service is going to work, and you're able to establish, say, a TAM, SAM, or SOM, and happy to discuss what that is. It's essentially market related. So your immediate market that you're able to capture, if that's a success, you can go anywhere. The government will want you to come along. The various ecosystem stakeholders, whether they're funders or even partners, distributors, manufacturers, they will want you to come along because everyone's in a race here, unfortunately. Instead of collaborating, they're sort of competing with each other to become the best. So naturally, if you have something that's required, you can go to any market.
I think that I think the advice is the normal advice. Like the normal thing is that you develop in a market, you build in a market, and then you scale. But I think that in many cases, it's important to really go back to basics and understand what problem you're solving and where are the early adopters. Okay, so there's two particular cases where we've seen this case. I have a company, for example, it's a company in Argentina. Their first customers were in Asia. Argentina is a very interesting place because they have like a abnormal amount of Nobel prizes for based off an education that is incredible. And this company, and I will not get into the details of what they exactly do, but this company was unable to find early adopters in Argentina. They were able to build it, but not real early adopters. They found early adopters in India. And an Argentinian company launched in India, scaled in India, expanded to Pakistan, to Indonesia. They launched last week in Kenya, and now people in Argentina said like, maybe you guys have something interesting. We should check it out. And it's only because they're already in many other parts of the world. So if that company followed the normal path, they would have been died. Okay. Then there are cases of companies that they're playing arbitrage. I mean, there's situations where there's a lot of something in one area or something very unique, and you want to move to other part of the world. No? So one of our unicorns of our first fund is a South Korean company that in the reading category of the iPhone is like number 2 only after Kindle, okay, in the US market. And what they do is they bring in Asian comics and Asian content to Western audiences. So most of their customer base is actually in the West. And they started in the US with English-speaking markets, but they're expanding super fast in Latin America because there's an interest in
I'm
the
really sorry to
Sorry.
interrupt. Unfortunately, we've been signaled that the session's come to an end. I just want you guys to give a round of applause for our panelists. There's incredible insights.